Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kutun.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. There is a political financing bill that has been drafted and was due to be tabled in early 2020. However, since then, there's been little clarity over the status of the bill. Earlier this month, members of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Political Financing met to discuss ways to make progress on political financing reform in Malaysia. Tonight, we speak to members of the group. Our first guest is Cynthia Gabriel. She is the founding director of the Centre to Combat Corruption and Cronism, CINTA. Cynthia, you attended this meeting, the All-Party Parliamentary Group meeting as a member of a civil society representative. We also understand that actually none of the members have had access to the contents of this draft bill. And I'm just wondering why that is and what do you understand to be the issue with the bill?
Thank you very much. We're actually dealing with a very hot potato issue today, and it's about political financing, which is actually money in politics. And as they say, money makes the world go round. And in this case, money has actually become a very complicated issue in the Malaysian political system. And we've had several governments in the last couple of years, 3 governments in the last 3 years, and all 3 governments have not actually become very clear on their commitment to enact a political financing law. The closest we got was when Pakatan Harapan won the elections in 2018. And in their manifesto was this commitment to draft a political financing law. So it got as far as a bill that was drafted, but it never actually got to the level of parliament or where it was presented to parliament for a debate, for the first reading, second reading. Nothing like that ever happened. But what we do know from our civil society efforts at that time was that the draft was being worked on by the GIACC, the Governance, Integrity, Anti-Corruption body, and that there was some ad hoc consultations with civil society. We never saw the bill, but we heard about excerpts of what was going to go into the bill, and it sounded like there was going to be progress. But with everything else that happened with the Sheraton move, this bill was also probably binned. We heard that it's now back to the Attorney General's chambers, but the gist of it is that there's no update. And I think this is what I wanted to emphasize, that there is no update. There's transparency at all. No discussion even at Parliament. So the fact that there is now an all-party parliamentary group is actually a huge step, that parliamentarians from both sides can actually come together to start demanding some kind of response around where the bill is. Now, the one thing I wanted to say, apart from the good work of civil society group, mainly ideas in actually trying to bring the whole group together. We've got 9 members of parliament from different political parties in there, and we've got civil society representatives with a lot of expertise actually working around political finance. But one of the things we do need to be assured of is that there cannot be foreign funding elements actually threatening the sovereignty of our country. And I think we saw that during the 1MDB fiasco and scandal, so-called Arab Prince, that until now hasn't come to show himself on whether that was a political donation and what was a political donation for. So it's really important about sources of funding and how the money is actually being used. It's an accountability mechanism to keep elections credible and to keep campaign financing at a level that is properly managed. And I think the key to everything here is transparency. And the one other thing we advocate...
Yeah, Cynthia, if I could just ask you to help clarify what the issue is. I mean, political parties need financing that any organization does in order to run its activities and service its membership. So what exactly are we looking at when we look at Malaysian political parties? And there might be, of course, political parties that historically have been with the government for decades, and then those who are historically outside of government in the opposition for decades. Are there different issues or dimensions of the issue with regard to these various players and stakeholders in the Malaysian political system?
Well, most definitely. So for a long time, we were governed by one coalition. So there was very strong links with the business sector and with the certain types of donors that had very real undue influence issues when it comes to donating money to a political party. So when there was actually the so-called monumental change that took place in 2018, there was hope that the donors themselves will actually want to demand for some kind of fair play, transparent process in which money can be donated to all political parties or whichever political parties that they saw fit. But then the same system started to play out itself, except that I think the donors now moved to those who were in political power. So incumbent governments have very big advantage. So I think to answer your question, Sharad, the issue is about opportunities for business to leverage on when a particular political coalition comes into power. And this is what we are trying to manage. The cross-links between business and politics has to be a lot more transparent than it is now, so that we avoid issues of conflict of interest and undue influence.
So where might the resistance come from to see this bill passed? I mean, you talked about 3 consecutive governments not having the political will to see this through. Is the resistance coming from MPs themselves? Is there an unwillingness to reform the way politics is done in Malaysia?
Well, that's the immediate impression when we look at how the different governments in the last 3 to 4 years have managed themselves. So I think this is the challenge that Malaysian voters really need to place on the different members of parliament. And the next general elections is around the corner. So it's really incumbent upon voters to also check on their candidates, that there would be commitment towards a better campaign financing, better political financing, and that for these members in the all-party parliamentary group to also have their political parties back them. And that's really important to actually see any success for this all-party parliamentary group to actually reach a level in which we can actually see the bill actually coming into fruition at some point. So the political parties need to show that kind of a commitment and to meet the challenge. And I think this is a very right time for that to happen, because there's no one political party that is so dominant in Malaysian politics anymore, unlike how it's been before. So now you have an opportunity where you do need to put your heads together to make the numbers. You do need to actually decide what is actually best for the political system. So the one more thing that I wanted to say, that there's a lot of hype now and momentum around an anti-party hopping law. But we do need to actually look, what are the real reasons why politicians hop? It's usually for a more lucrative situation where the grass is greener on the other side, or there's some promise that, an MACC charge might be dropped, or that, they would get a government-linked position somewhere, etc. So the key to stop party hopping and to actually provide real discipline in the whole political system is to also manage money in politics. And that is the most critical, crucial approach that we need to take. So we'd like to suggest that an anti-party hopping law must be accompanied by a political financing law. And that is perhaps the only way to manage the situation at present.
Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Cynthia Gabriel from C4.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll come back and speak to the Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Political Financing. Stay tuned.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga Awani dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
살았다오. 제발 살아서 버텨다.
죄도 없이 이유도 모른 채 그 많은 사람들이 죽었습니다.
내 소중한 일을 도륙는 놈들의 피를 말릴 것이다.
나를 필요로 하는 사람들을 위해 살려야 합니다.
선비님을 위해서도.
Bloody Hot dan banyak lagi stream sekarang di Disney Plus Hotstar. Naik taraf ke Ultrabox atau aktifkannya sekarang di astro.com.my/Disney.
MasterChef has produced some of the biggest names in food, and they're coming back. Oh my gosh! We're putting them head to head with 12 of the best home cooks in the country. For the first time ever, it's fans versus favourites. Welcome to MasterChef! I mean, are you serious?
These fans have been watching season after season of MasterChef, and now it's their time.
So what you all been waiting for, guys?
The health minister is determined to eradicate toxic work culture in all government hospitals.
More people are admitted to public health facilities as COVID cases spiked during Hari Raya celebration.
Prime Minister Dato Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob rolled out the red carpet for American investors as a preferred investment destination.
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Gutten. Let's continue our discussion about political financing in Malaysia. Joining us now is Wong Soo Kee. She is a DAP member of Parliament for Kluang, and she's the secretary for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Political Financing. Soo Kee, we understand that efforts to push through a Political Financing Act have stretched back to 2005, and we just heard from Cynthia Gabriel that the last effort to table or have the bill drafted was by the Pakatan Harapan government. That bill was never tabled in Parliament. I'm wondering whether you're actually seeing political will to see this bill through.
Definitely, yes. We need some political will because, first of all, almost every political party will be a bit afraid of this bill. So, first of all, I would say all political parties have to come to consensus that we need to be more transparent. And secondly, all political parties have to agree that we shall not seek revenge against each other's donors after their own victory. And third, can Malaysians accept that parties need to be funded publicly to avoid over-dependence on big donor money? I think these three are the big questions. And the first two would really depend on the political will of all political parties to push through this bill in the parliament.
Soo Kee, if you look at the DAP itself, a party that's been in or had been in opposition at the federal level and the state level for decades, survival would be very difficult. Your donors were probably reluctant to go public with their support for the party. It is an example of the one type of political funding that would have happened under those authoritarian, repressive circumstances. When you look at your own party today, especially as it leads the has led the Penang government for a long time, have you seen a shift in the way in which vested interests, economic and developers, I think in particular, I think is something the DAP is often accused of being very cozy with developers. Are those relationships transparent? Is your party willing to reveal all it can about its relationship to economic and business interests?
I think that is exactly the concern of every party, not only DAP. For example, other big parties or those establishments, they actually have larger network and big donor money than DAP. DAP may have already gotten a very, very small portion. So we are actually not that scared of being revealed, but our donors are, because they are scared of being seek revenge by the previous authoritarian government. So I think we need to protect our donors as well, which is why at the very beginning I say all political parties have to agree that we should not do that. We should respect each other supporters, that it is a democracy right for our citizens to donate, and also a right for the businesses to support who they think will benefit them more being in the government. I think this is not only regarding DAP or whichever party.
So, Suki, you mentioned a little bit earlier whether or not the public can accept, having, say, public funds or a government allocation to fund political parties, as opposed to allowing for, free political donations from unchecked sources. Can I ask you whether you believe, in talking to perhaps even your constituency, whether there is public awareness and a deep understanding about the issues of political financing? Is this, the idea of reforming political financing, is this something that resonates with people?
Definitely not very well resonated with the people, because people see politics as something very dirty, but it is exactly this perception. They avoid talking about proper funding to the political party because they see politics as dirty, as corrupted. But it is exactly, we want to resolve this issue, so we need to make our money more transparent and cleaner. So which is why we need to have a public financing bill to regulate it, not only getting donation from the public, I mean from all the small donors, but also, if possible, we can take example from Germany or other countries, that we have a public donation, I mean from the public coffer, that channel the money based on the votes every party received in a general election. So every party can run their daily business, from organization to events, or even policy ideas or campaign, based on the money, based on the support they receive in the election. I think that is crucial to make our politics cleaner.
Right. I imagine that would also mean that there's going to be transparent accounting for all the monies that come in and how they're spent and so on and so forth. But in the meanwhile, Suki, tell us a little bit about the DAP. What kind of internal mechanism
misuses or abuses the funding process? Because one can imagine political agents or elected officials, accepting money on behalf of the party, but then channeling it into their own accounts and such. Are there agreed upon rules of accepting money that exist now for the DAP? And has that been successful in preventing abuse?
For the time being, DAP has always depend on our allowances, the electorate's allowances, and also public donations to survive. So actually, it is not a secret. Most of the DAP electorates have to contribute 15%, 1/5 of our allowances to the party every month. That is how DAP survive along the years. And also, we always do public donations, so we depend on small donors to survive. At the most difficult time, our Secretary General, the former Secretary General, have to sell off some books, some products that we produce to get sufficient funding to fund our staff and our daily business. That's how DAP, survive until today. That's why we believe that we need to be more transparent and get a proper funding, so to allow not only DAP, but allow smaller parties or new parties to survive. Otherwise, all our political parties will go back to the old circle, will depend on the big donors, big corporate, or even GLC money to survive. And we know that it's a very vicious cycle.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, MP for Kluang, Wong Soo Kee there. We're going to take another quick break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Stay tuned.
Melindungi Anda dan seisi keluarga dalam ruang tertutup. Panasonic.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen GWSME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
Hi, thanks so much for staying with Shrad and I on Consider This. Joining us now, we have Ira Azhari, Senior Member of the Democracy and Governance Unit for the think tank Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, better known by its acronym IDEAS. Ira, we just heard from DAP MP for Kluang, Wong Soo Kee, that perhaps the issue of political financing reform is not something that resonates with the man or woman on the street. I'm wondering how you would make the argument to the everyday person that about the importance of political financing reform, about regulating political financing.
So I think for the man on the street, it is absolutely important to know where your politicians and where your political parties get money from. And why is this important? Because such a big source of corruption, I think, in Malaysia at the moment is one of the big sources is political corruption. And I think the man on the street in Malaysia has no problem understanding that corruption is a big problem in Malaysia. But I think there is a disconnect, right, between knowing that corruption is a problem and also understanding what the sources of corruption are. So I think that to make the case, I think is absolutely important, because it's these relationships that political parties or politicians have with with private corporations or with very rich individuals. These are the relationships that I think in the end compromises things like good governance and transparency, and money that is meant for the benefit of the Malaysian public. And when politics becomes very, very expensive, that's when the incentive for corruption and for corrupt practices then happens. And and I think other than that, the key is just to actually show how corruption, in the end of the day, affects all of our pockets, right? With the rising cost of living, with rising food prices, and all of that, we cannot afford to further allow corrupt practices to happen for politicians or whoever that is governing us to get away with corrupt practices. So I think that is really important, and I believe if the messaging is done right, I believe that Malaysians will resonate with this. Yeah.
Ira, since the late 90s, there's been a call for reform, and in the Malaysian political system, and it only was as the Pakatan Rakyat and subsequent Pakatan Harapan made inroads into political power at the state level that we started to see how reform might be rolled out or how it might be sequenced in a meaningful way. But I think since 2018, with the expectations running really far ahead of the capacity of politicians to deliver, maybe there is a sense that there's much more talk about reform than there is actual reform. I wonder if in kind of locating where political financing is in the kind of smorgasbord of reforms that we all aspire to, is it among the more difficult ones? Is it something that is tricky because it goes to the heart of the way in which politicians and political parties have operated for decades?
Yeah, Sharad. I think that because the culture of transparency is just almost non-existent in our politics. So, in a way, it's natural that there is so much resistance and so much inertia, when we suggest something as fundamental and something as game-changing as transparency in political financing. But I think, what our elected leaders need to remember and need to understand is that, political financing, transparency in political financing is not, some strange or new revolutionary idea. It is the norm, actually, in many, most democratic countries today, that there is some form of regulation, right? So in other countries, it might not be in the form of a political funding act. It might come in the form of a political parties act, or an elections act, or even a companies act that regulates how political parties get donations. So there is some form of regulation in most countries, or most mature democracies, I would say, around the world. So Malaysia is actually really left behind by not having this law. And it is such a fundamental thing in politics. And seeing how it relates to other reforms. I mean, Malaysian public has resonated so much with the anti-party hopping law, right? So, right. Actually political financing is so much related to that. So when there's no transparency, politicians then jump to parties that are richer. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the anti-party hopping law, because that seems to be there's some progress on that front. Where I think it's become part of the public consciousness now to understand a little bit more about party hopping. I'm wondering whether that's because it was included in the confidence and supply agreement between Pakatan Harapan and Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob's government. Do you think political financing should have been included as one of the reforms under the CSA?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Ideas was quite disappointed when the CSA document came out and political financing reform was not in there, because obviously we believe it is absolutely fundamental. But also I think that, something like the party hopping law really sort of became part of the public's consciousness. Obviously that's because the Sheraton move just, displayed how party hopping can just contribute to instability and uncertainty to the political system. And I think many Malaysians have seen how party hopping really is a crime almost. So I think that's why it's just gained so much traction. But I also believe that on the political side, politicians really know that they need to pass this because they themselves have become a victim of party hopping, right? Their own parties have become a victim to that. So the thing with political financing is, I feel like the stakeholders involved, political parties and politicians, perhaps that kind of message still hasn't resonated with them, that we are all victims of an opaque and a political system that is where we don't know where the money comes from. So that is the job of civil society, I think, to really drum in that message that, having this law will actually help everyone, and will actually, transparency is good for all parties. Yeah.
Ira, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. Ira Azhari from the think tank Ideas, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.
Good night.